The content shared in this podcast reflects personal experiences and spiritual perspectives. It isn't intended as medical, psychological, or professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to explore ideas with discernment and seek guidance from qualified professionals when needed. Welcome to Mystican Identity, where we discover the unity in every tradition. I'm your host, the Mystic. Let's journey inward and remember what we've always known. Well, greetings, and thank you so much for joining me in another episode. So let's do a recap of last week's episode quickly, and this way we can flow into today's discussion on what many beliefs talk about when they mention the fall. The fall. Bum, bum, bah. So last week I retold the story in Isaiah 14 by personifying it. Years ago, when I recognized the power in taking this story and personalizing it, rather than seen as like a third party reading an account of an event, treating it more like, how would somebody be writing this and why would they be writing this in the way that they did? Well, that practice began to transform my life. In the same way that the Bhagavad Gita can be read as a story, but also can be read as a personification of the battle between ego and true capital S self within. So last week with my origins story, I more or less did a dance with Isaiah 14. This was intentional, this little dance, because I wanted to just show how a mystic, for example, would try to describe their own thought process. Things that were revealed to them by the divine through meditation or whatever process, but how a mystic who had these revelations would try to convey their self-realization of their relationship with the divine and why they are separate from it and subject to eternal separation from it. I wove in the story of the prodigal son because it's one of multiple recurring themes of leaving the divine for the world and then being only able to return to the divine by means of rejecting the clinging to worldliness or realization of the emptiness of worldly things. I'll get into this in a further episode, but it was quite a trip when I realized that there's so many recurring themes which tell the same story of this relationship. Isaiah mentions one who boldly states, "I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." But it is then brought down to the pit. The pit is another item which gets revisited time and time again, which I get into further down the road. So this passage was taught to me as almost like a flashback story in a movie. And it's the story of the fall of Lucifer from heaven and a legion of angels or quote unquote demons which followed him. When I read this as a mystic, I can keep it as a story. I can still keep it as a story and get meaning out of it. So for those who read it in the way it was taught to me, keep on embracing it that way. I don't want to change your perspective at all. This is my perspective, and really what it is just depth. It's kind of breaking the fourth wall. It's a fourth dimension to the story. And once I did that, I found that there is so much that can be learned from it that way as well. So please don't change a thing. For me, though, what I was trying to establish is that my capital S self, my consciousness, was part of what would be called the fallen angels, or what would be described as demons. And to be clear, not demons in the theatrical sense that we're all used to. Demons is just another word or word assigned to a consciousness relationship to God. And those fallen angels that chose defiance of God, the divine, to pursue the things of the world, much like the prodigal son taking his stuff and going out to the big city, the big city lights. So as I read this story for my capital S self, Lucifer is not an individual entity that tempts and steals me from the divine. Lucifer is a group think title or a group consciousness title, a common philosophy, so to speak. Much like a football team or any other team, really, it doesn't matter. But like a team is a group of individuals representing one particular side or brand under a team name, such is the concept of Lucifer, the group, the team, the tribe, made up of a legion of, let's say, separatists from the divine. So the way that I was telling this in the last episode was intentionally told the way it was to let people sit with it a bit, to try to see into it without me just handing material out. And that's because that's how I started to see it. I started to see through the fog and get more clarity into how other traditions began, with mystics sharing the same story, only through their reference to their culture, their current culture, and geography, and even nature. All these elements surrounding them that they used as tools to describe their mystical experience and revelations. And just to be clear, this isn't in any means a way to be edgy or different or create something new. It's actually drastically not anything new. So what that did for me when I looked at that story the way that I just described it is that it completely removed something which I will discuss further, and that is the blame game. As a side note, I find it so interesting that the blame game was the first gotcha moment mentioned in the Bible. It's the first time mentioned that one can either take responsibility for defiance, own it, apologize, and act differently toward the divine, or pass the buck to somebody else as a way of dodging responsibility. Skip forward from Genesis to Ecclesiastes, and we get, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. And fast forward again, and our world is still doing the same blame game. I was only doing this because you did that. It's not my fault you did that. I wash my hands of blah, blah, blah. They're all games. They're all dodging. So that's where last week brings us up to the point of our current place, which is the fall. That brings us into today's episode, where the legion of consciousnesses like mine weren't cast out, but by choice left unity with the divine. And I'm going to pause here for a moment, though, because I want to illustrate what that simple little switch in perspective does for myself, at least. I feel, for me, it takes far more depth, more surrender. I like that. That feels good. Surrender. To say that I left. I made an act of defiance. My consciousness made an act of defiance. I didn't get fooled. I didn't get tricked. I'm not a victim of a clever devil. My consciousness boldly and arrogantly left. The divine isn't cruel, however. This era, let's call it, an era. Yeah, that'll work. This era is a period of grace. And that's a phrase that's commonly thrown around. Sometimes I almost wonder if that word has been thrown around so much that it's kind of lost its meaning. It's kind of just, its flavor is gone. I feel maybe that's just me. So this era, a period of grace, is where I and any other consciousnesses that understands that can course correct. So instead of a constant rebirth, reincarnation over and over again, forgetting where we originally came from, the kingdom of heaven, as if we're descending gradually more and more into an abyss or pit, so to speak. And that should sound familiar, abyss or pit. So instead of descending gradually more and more into that abyss or that pit, we can begin seeing our clinging to form. And this is more than just physical stuff. It's also attachment to other concepts of stuff and emotional attachment to the need for the concepts themselves. It gets really deep. It's very deep material, layer after layer. So instead of clinging to all of that stuff, we can start clinging more to our relationship with God, the divine, the creator, the beloved, and with each step, find our way back to unity with God. So, the divine created a place for us to exercise our separateness, our desires, as a means for us to get it all out, to just get it out of our system. Have a big hoopla, get it out of your system, and come back home when you're done. A creation of this versus that. An occurrence so big, so enormous and magnificent. Oh, one might call it I don't know. How about a big bang? That sounds cool. I dig it. Or, as I like to call it, when God snapped its fingers. It was this point where Creator cast the seeds for our physical plane into the garden. Sound familiar? Or the universe. And that garden can produce from those seeds whatever the conditions come together to create. From that, and over time, the correct conditions came together over billions of years to form our planet. And our planet is so amazing. Every little bit of nature tells us the story of our relationship to the divine and serves as a reminder to us such that we should never really be able to lose our way back home. The examples are everywhere all around us. For another episode, I actually find this as a side note kind of very interesting that these examples of nature are all around us, and it just means paying attention. But it's no surprise that in an act of defiance, we're surrounded also by constant distractions getting in the way of those examples. But anyway, back to this. Our planet really is fascinating. The more and more I learn about it, it's so obvious to me of the divine's influence and these little breadcrumbs that we have as examples of ways to look for the divine. And to me, this is why so many beliefs make reference to nature. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna reveals himself through all aspects of creation. Of trees, I am the fig tree. Among beasts, I am the lion. I am the heat and fire, the life in all beings, and the austerity in ascetics. This is basically saying nature is not just a metaphor. It's a living expression of the divine. By observing its forms, we glimpse the infinite. In Romans 1:20, Paul writes, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made." Nature is the first scripture. Long before the Bible, the divine was writing in wind, river, and stars. In Sufism, "And on the earth are signs for the certain, and in yourselves. Then will you not see?" Nature is full of signs, and Sufi poets like Rumi and Hafiz constantly refer to flowers, birds, and the moon as messages from the beloved. In Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, verse 8, "The highest good is like water. Water gives life to the 10,000 things and does not strive." In this, we see that nature reveals the Tao, the way, through its simplicity, humility, and harmony. Watching nature is learning from the Tao in motion. In Buddhism, while early Buddhism is non-theistic, Zen and Mahayana texts highlight awakening through nature. Dogen wrote, "The green mountains are always walking. With their feet they do not step, but with their whole body they walk." The interpretation for this is that nature is not separate from enlightenment. It is living Zen. A flower blooms in silence, and in that silence a teaching unfolds. From the Lakota Sioux to Aboriginal Australians, nature is often seen as kin, a sacred teacher, so to speak. The Great Spirit is in all things. He is in the air we breathe. The Great Spirit is our Father, but the earth is our mother. Black Elk. The interpretation for this is that every animal, stone, and trees carries spiritual significance. Nature's not symbolic of the divine, it is the divine. And as a side note, something I'll discuss later, I actually have this planned, ironically enough, and it ties together another common thread, one which has more meaning to me now than it did before, seeing as I'm starting to read things more as the way mystics would write things. And that is the part about honor thy father and thy mother. This is something that a lot of people should know, and it's a verse in the Bible. And I've seen many people get tugged back and forth with this one. And I'm sure anybody out there understands the different questions that come around honor thy father and thy mother. But I see it completely different now because, as is mentioned by the indigenous tradition, to honor father and mother is to honor God, the divine, and the earth. For in honoring one, you're honoring the other, and vice versa. In Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the works of his hands. Each element of nature is a vibration of divine language, cosmic poetry written in wind and wave. I actually like the way that Alan Watts puts it. We do not come into this world, we come out of it. As leaves from a tree, as the ocean waves, as an apple tree apples, our planet just so happens to people. Every individual is an expression of the whole realm of nature, a unique action of the total universe. It's pretty groovy stuff. I love it. And from this began something. This helps me picture it. This is a contemporary mystic way of looking at this period of grace. And this is where I dig the mystic way. It's so cool. Prior to science uncovering the mysteries of the microcosm, mystics had to describe this using the plane of nature and 5 senses to do it, which is great. Now, I personally see it through what I would call spiritual cell division. So check this out. We're living in a time which I would call spiritual cell division. The divine, the original cell, the source of all being, is in the midst of dividing, not randomly, not by mistake, but as part of a great metaphysical process spiritually on a spiritual plane. And this is the result of a choice, of movement. On one side is the true cell, the pure essence of unity, what the mystics might call the ground of being, the kingdom, the Tao, the Brahman. On the other side, a mutation, a mutated cell, an anti-cell, a reflection of defiance, the desire to be separate, to be something else. Right now, humanity finds itself caught in this in-between space, the pinch point. Like if you ever seen cell division, there's kind of like this part where between the two sides is a side of congested focus, so to speak. And that's where we find ourselves right now, that little pinch point, that intense moment just before the final split, when the division is nearly complete but not yet. And so the concentration of both this and that is thick. It's super concentrated, it's dense. The contrast is heavy. The tension is palpable. Suffering and awakening are happening simultaneously, right beside one another, all together, because we're compressed in the middle of the split. We're still sharing the same membrane, so to speak, and this allows for flow back and forth to each side. For now, in this era, but eventually, the division will finish. One cell will carry the fullness of unity, the other the fullness of separation. And here's the mystery. Once the separation is complete, what happens to the bridge? What happens to those of us who still remember the original cell? That's the role of grace, this period of grace that gets referred to. Grace is the lingering pulse of the original cell, kind of like reaching into the anti-cell saying, it's not too late to remember. But eventually, one is going to be separate from the other. As I've said in the previous one, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And every inside has an outside, and every outside has an inside. So at some point, something has to be absolute this, and something has to be absolute that in order to be defined. When I see things through this spiritual cell division, a mutated spiritual cell, and the little pinch point that we're at right now during this era of grace, it brings back to me this question that a lot of people I've heard saying. I've actually said it myself. I've pondered this myself. Maybe this will sound familiar. Has anyone you've known or have you ever said, is the world getting worse, or is it just that we're capable of seeing more of what we didn't see before? Now, through the lens of this spiritual cell division, I see it very differently. If we have to look at things as good versus bad, or better yet, suffering versus bliss. There, that one seems to be non-finger pointing-ish. Huh? If we have to look at things as suffering versus bliss, it's not that the world is becoming worse, it's that the world is becoming less good. Or it's not that the world is suffering more, it's just that the world is becoming less blissful. Not in a moralistic sense, but in the sense that the divine substance, the original light, is slowly withdrawing in that process of division, essentially returning to itself. Those who shift their clinging from the material to the divine, well, they're not cycling back into this plane through rebirth. Essentially, they're not reweaving themselves into this particular story. And so this world becomes a little bit more densely made of what remains: distraction, confusion, division, suffering, the blame game. It's not punishment, it's just the final phase of the split. And for those who feel like things are getting heavier, it's because you're still seeing that there's light to be carried. That light still exists. And so what do? Well, we remember. We serve as bridges. And I believe that Ram Dass would be the one that really drove home to me the concept of being a servant, of serving. And that's where the magic happens. We serve as bridges. We serve as breadcrumbs. We embody the memory of the original cell of that unity so that others might feel it, even in a world that's getting really, really thick with forgettingness. And this is grace in motion. So thank you for being here with me today. Next episode, I'm going to dive into the blame game. It's a fun one. I love it. Because that whole story, the one that I'm used to with the one that we're used to, the tree, there's a snake. It's a great story. And when that story is looked at through the view of a mystic, it still retains, if anybody wanted to look at it in its literal sense as a story of actuality, please continue doing so. There's a lot of value in that. But the way that I look at it through like a mystic's way of writing it, there's just so much depth to it. It gets below the waves that we see, and it gets into the density of that ocean that starts to get compacted. So next episode, I'm going to dive into the blame game. Ooh. It explores how mystics from many traditions, I'm going to just bring everything all together and kind of mix them up, but it's how mystics from many traditions in their own beautiful way visualized the separation of human with the divine, with such storytelling elements as like snakes, forbidden fruit, deception, loss, and struggle. So more is coming, more remembering, more unweaving, more becoming. And as always, my fellow seekers, I wish you and your loved ones all the best. Have a wonderful experience. Until next now.